Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for today's event. Thank you, virtually and in person. Of course, we are celebrating Jennifer Givhan's. Did I say that right? We went through this. I got nervous. Jennifer Givhan and River Woman, River Demon. In conversation, we have, of course, Sarina Dahlan. Oh, I did that again too. Of course, River Woman, River Demon is a psychological thriller that weaves together the threads of folk magic with personal and cultural empowerment. For those of you who are joining us who may not have heard of these authors, Jennifer is a National Endowment for the Arts and Penn Rosenthal Emerging Voices Fellow, a Chicana indigenous novelist, poet, and transformational coach. She's also the author of JUBILEE, which received honorable mention for the 2021 Rudolfo Anaya Best Latino-Focused Fiction Book Award, and TRINITY SIGHT, winner of the 2020 Southwest Book Award. Sarina was born in an Indonesian family in Thailand, and she is the author of Reset. While children in the West will grow up on fairy tales, she learned the parables through ghost stories, mythologies, and Japanese manga. If you want to purchase any one of their books, you'll see, for those who are joining in virtually, there's a link below. They'll take you to our website. You can buy any of their books signed. If you want like a personalized copy, please call the store before we close, so make sure we get your personalized. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Again, my name is Sarina, and this is Jen, and her book. I'm going to sound like I'm gushing, and I am, because this book is amazing. I read it in 2.5 days. It's the best of magical realism plus thriller. So, like, the words are just dripping poetry. For those of you who received my texts as I was writing them, you know how much I really enjoyed this book. So, Jen, can you guys hear me okay? Okay, awesome. I think we kind of have some thoughts on what we want to talk about, but before that, I think you want to do a little bit of magic for us.
Yeah, a couple of things. So thank you all so much for being here. And I have a little giveaway. So would you call it a random number for us? 7. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's no one there. So you're the winner. Come on up, and you get the full deck of the Oracle cards, and then there's a cedar smudge stick there, and a candle, and a crystal quartz, and a smoky quartz, and a tea bag. You're so welcome. And then I just wanted to share a little bit about one of the goddesses who has been on my altar the whole time that I was writing this book. So this comes from my Mexica culture, which is what incorrectly called Aztec culture. This is Tlatzolteotl, who is the spirit of divine love. And one thing that I really love about her, and that we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, is that she's a mother goddess, but she takes in one of the wonderful things that she does that I love about her is that you can give her all of your filth, right? All of your shame, all of your darkness, all of whatever is like ugly. She takes it in. It's this mother that just like brings it into herself. And I loved that idea of that a mom can just be who she is, right? And that a mom can be potentially have darkness inside of her. So I want to read the back of this card to you. Tlatzolteotl, sweetness of life, the beauty of all that exists. My heart opens, my empty heart is filled with you and your infinite love. You who have the tradition, you who possess the knowledge, you who possess the wisdom, you the great spinner, you the great weaver, you the creator, the doer who creates the fabric of life. Mother of all the divine that inhabits the earth, illuminate my life, you and the moonlight, my path. And I loved this idea of like, she just comes totally the way that she is, and yet she's this divine mother. And so she didn't have to be perfect in any way. And we're going to talk about complex mothers and unlikable women in books. And that was my goal, was to create a mom who had a lot of flaws. And so I had Tlatzolteotl on my altar the whole time that I was writing River Woman, River Demon. And I feel like she really did inspire and help me to write this book. So I'm I feel really blessed to share her with you tonight in this space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you started with that conversation, because I felt that as I was reading this, I did not quite identify with Eva, but I love her to death because she is so complex. She's a character that is both of everything. You know, she's scared, yet she is constantly trying to fight. And then she doesn't believe in herself, but yet everyone around her believes in her and then love her.
Mm-hmm.
And she is a mother, and she doesn't believe she's a good mother. And there are certain things that, you know, she's just a complex person. She has this trauma.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you look at her children and you're like, she did something right. So I love the way you write great characters. What was your inspiration? How did Eva come to be?
Yeah, so much of her, I have to admit, I think my friend Lauren is in the audience tonight, and you were talking about autofiction, and that resonated so much with me, this idea of taking events from your own life and inspiration from your own life and fictionalizing it. And, you know, part of my goal was that I've been reading thrillers for many years, and especially psychological thrillers, but I was seeing mostly white women, you know, and mostly affluent, at least in the thrillers that like I was seeing. Thankfully now there's a lot more that have just come out in the past few years. But when I started, this was about a decade ago, it was mostly white women. And I didn't see any Chicana characters at all. And so a lot of her came from my own story. And I was dealing with postpartum depression in those early days of mothering. And so it was actually a medicine for me to read these psychological thrillers, because the women characters had really dark thoughts, but yet they weren't ashamed to share their stories. And it was fiction, right? But so I felt like I was able to, in all of my novels, and particularly this one, to explore those feelings that are sometimes are often called taboo in our society. Like, moms are not supposed to say that. Moms are not supposed to feel that way, you know. And I was able to put that into the book, and really not be afraid of the darkness, not be afraid to go there. So if I were writing a memoir, I couldn't have done it 10 years ago when I was going through it, because I was so scared of the repercussions because of the way that society polices motherhood.
Yeah, and
Right.
that was the one thing that I really love about Eva, because she's so honest.
Yeah.
And because she's honest, she's embracing that part of herself, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that she just doesn't really believe that she was better, but she was just an amazing person because she was so honest. And eventually, you know, like, she kind of just embraced herself, all of her, all the flaws and all. And it made me just root for her and everything. And I love the part where she's a flawed mother, because, like you said, society really truly is tough on women.
Yeah.
You can't be, you know, like, anything but perfect.
Yeah. And especially as a mother too, right? It's like, then you get both. You have to be a certain way as a woman and then a certain way as a mother, and it's exhausting.
Mm-hmm. But it's what made Eva's head so fun to be in.
That's awesome.
Because she's unreliable. She's an unreliable narrator. She, you know, you're always constantly questioning, is it in her head? Is it real? Is it, you know, like, what is it? Is it like a reaction of her trauma or not?
And that was one of my goals too with magical realism, because I felt like I wanted the reader to have a sense that this actually could be happening, but that there's also this blurring and this kind of slippery space where it could just be psychological as well. And so I'm fascinated by that idea. And what we were talking the other day, and I wanted to bring this up too, of what kind of a mirror magical realism and speculative fiction can bring on society and on the self, right? And so, because you get to do kind of allegorical things when you can bring in ghosts, when you can bring in, right, all of these kind of like fantasy elements.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you kind of can make a comment on society about how it views race, how it views motherhood, how it views women and versus men, and how unequal all of that is.
Right, exactly. And so so when you were saying that Eva embraces the kind of the blurring of herself and who she is, that was one of my goals, was to show that like in Latinx culture, brujas are witches and curanderas are healers, but they're the same. But yet I've told a lot of, you know, when I just go out into the world and I say I'm a bruja, and then there are some people who are like, why do you call yourself that? You know, and it's like a negative thing, like, oh no. And so then I explain where that comes from and that kind of reclamation, like of that aspect of myself. And a lot, you know, so many women are doing that now with the term witch, and that it's like, I was just watching a movie. Oh, it was the Hocus Pocus 2 with my kids. And even though that one does the same thing of reclaiming witchiness and women's power, but there's also kind of a funny moment in the movie, but where they say you witch, and they mean it, you know, as like instead of the B word or whatever, but it's still that negative, like throwing that around. And so I wanted to take that idea of what does it mean to be a bruja and to potentially like cast or conjure darkness, right? And for what purpose? And so in the book, it's meant to be a protective magic, but you know, Eva's not sure, like, what are the repercussions of going into the darkness? And for myself, as a writer, it's a metaphor for going into the underbelly, going into the darkness of the subconscious, and going back into that trauma, going back into that place where, you know, of the postpartum depression, and really examining it. But it's difficult down there, you know, to stay in that when you're writing, especially if you're writing grief or you're writing, right, any kind of difficult material, right? How do you go down in there, but how do you also protect yourself so that you're able to pull it out onto the page and make it believable, but at the same time, you know, not succumb to the feelings that are down there.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's true for writers, you know, the places that we have to go to, and it's
exactly,
some of those places are dark.
Right.
However, without going through that tunnel of darkness, you're not going to emerge onto the other side, into the lightness. So I love how your book also embraces both sides, and it's like, it's two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not one or the other, it's both. And I think embracing both and being honest, that was like the one message. And that's why I really, really like Eva. Because I felt like she was so complicated, but so real and so honest. So, but I want to kind of talk a little bit about magical realism, because I think we both kind of having, you know, growing up kind of in different culture as well. And I think I told you that to me, magical realism, and I've always identified with magical realism. I love the genre. So your book hit me in all the right places, but I never thought of it as magical realism. I just thought of it as realism. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that I grew up in Thailand, where ghost and magic and all of that, they're just kind of blended in. There's no like this huge delineation between that. So, do you want to kind of talk about how did you kind of choose magical realism, or was it more like it chose?
Yeah, I was just about to say that, you know, already it chose me. So I grew up on the border and in the desert, and I feel like we were steeped in it. You know, again, Lauren's in the audience, and I'm just so excited because I grew up with Lauren. We've been besties since high school. And so when we both were baby writers, and it was like, you know, this is a dream come true. But we were steeped in the magic of this place, and it was kind of cut off. It's in the Improva Valley, down on the other side of the mountains over there on the way to Yuma. And so we were steeped in the magic of this place that felt like, you know, you had to traverse through like 200 miles of desert any way, any direction you went. And it was like, we're in this bowl, you know, deep in the desert. And it felt like it was just this magical place. And, you know, I would walk where I lived on the edge of town, I would walk to the park where the New River flowed, and it was like you could just see forever because it's completely flat land out there. And so I don't know, I felt like my childhood was so magical. I read a quote the other day by Neil Gaiman that said that adult writers are always trying to get back to what they saw in childhood. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is so true. You know, and as a mother too, mothering my children has allowed me to relive my childhood through them and right some wrongs from my childhood as well. And I always see writing as mothering the page, like mothering myself, mothering my kids. And so addressing some of the things that went unaddressed in childhood. And I feel like doing that through a magical reel, through a speculative fiction lens, allows me to do that kind of like time travel that is necessary, right? Because I feel like motherhood has felt like a time machine. And it allowed me to go way back into the deep past, even to see my mom as a child, because now I'm a mother and it's like I'm older, even just as a woman, I'm older than my mom was when she was traumatized as a child. And so like, it feels like a time machine to be able to write these kinds of wrongs on the page. And I feel like magical realism allowed me to do that more so than like so-called realism would have.
Yeah, because also another thing that I love about magical realism in your book is the language. Everything is so steeped and so rich. You know, it's like I think in my review of your book, I was like, I couldn't really describe this without describing how it smells and how it tastes, you know, and what it looks, you know, just it's just very visceral. So I really appreciate that about the genre and your book.
Again, I think it was growing up in the Imperial Valley. And like you say, you grew up in Thailand, and it was like, no, I don't know, there's no other place like it that I've ever been. And I had never traveled anywhere when I grew up in the Imperial Valley. Like New York was a whole other world to me that I never even thought, like I'd never even been on a plane. And so it felt like a whole other universe. And so then my first book, Trinity Sight, took me to New York City, and it was like just this dream come true. But I do feel like everything I write goes back to the Imperial Valley and the smells of that place. And then I grew up my kids have grown up in Albuquerque. And so that's also the place that I was living for the past 12 years. And again, it's so magical, right? So there are hot air balloons that go. How many of you all have been to Albuquerque? And yeah, you definitely have to get there sometime if you can. But hot air balloons go up pretty much all the way around the year, but especially in October with the balloon fiesta. And it's just completely magical. You go out at like 6, 7 in the morning, and there are hundreds of these colorful hot air balloons, and it feels like you're a little child, like in this wonderland. It feels like you've gone to Oz or something.
And your lightning shows fabulous.
Yeah, the monsoons. And actually, as a child, we went out to White Sands. That's when we were first going back to our ancestral, to discover our ancestral heritage there in New Mexico. And I remember going to White Sands, and there was a lightning storm. And it was just, it stayed in my mind. That's actually in Trinity Sight. And I have an image of my grandma rolling down one of the white sand hills. And it was like, I didn't grow up where there was snow. So this was snow for us in White Sands.
So beautiful. I mean, we keep talking about like how your book is dark and all of that, but it's also funny.
Thank you.
I remember laughing out loud when I was reading it, and then there's some passages in there that I was like, man, how does she? Because it made reading dark things and heavy things so much easier. And it's almost like an art form, how you kind of weave that in, and to kind of like, in the darkest of moment, you throw in this joke. But it's not really a joke. It's just because Eva is just a funny person.
She's ironic. She's very ironic. And I don't think of myself as a funny person. I love to laugh. And I love to be happy and be joyful. Even though I do deal with quite a bit of mental illness that keeps me depressed a lot of the time, but I still love to laugh. And so I think that just her ironic personality came through, because if you ask me how did I craft humor, I have no idea. Like, I don't know.
Can I read a little?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the part I'm just like, it's funny. Let's see. And I just thought that, mixing darkness and humor together, it just makes it makes the darkness richer.
Yeah.
So here, I drive past more spray painted handmade signs, streaked plywood scraps from message boards, alfalfa, call 505 XXXX, oven bread, fresh, come in. Oh, my favorite by far, full body massage. Who would trust that solicitation? Come to my house, random stranger, and let me rub you down. I have a table in my living room you can get naked on. I'll grease you up nice and then massage you. Yeah, massage you with a cleaver. I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, so we were actually driving. So like I said, we were living in Albuquerque for the past 12 years, and Los Lunas, where the book is set, is the little town right next to Albuquerque. And so we were driving through Los Lunas just so I could do some research for the book. And these signs really are everywhere of just people advertising their small businesses. And I was like, massage at their house. Like, who would want to do that, So.
And the fact that she kind of said it into her head was funny. And there's a lot of love in this book as well. And even it's the core of the story. So how did you make that decision that it was going to be love centered? Or again, was it did the story come to you whole?
Yeah, it came to me whole. I mean, I knew that I wanted to write a love story. And I think all of my stories are love stories in some way, because it's a reclamation. It's a healing journey for the speaker. Or I say speaker, I'm a poet first and foremost. So I always forget to say protagonist. I say speaker for everything, because I think we're all poets at heart. I really do. You're all nodding yes, so we don't have to debate it. But I will debate it afterward if you want to.
I won't debate it.
But no, yeah, I knew that it was a love story from the beginning. And that's one of the things that I love about both of our novels is the genre blurring, and that yours also, Reset, where is it? Right there, is a love story first and foremost, but it's also speculative fiction. It's also very philosophical and literary. And that's how it was for mine, that I'm so glad that Blackstone, who published both of our books, doesn't ask us to choose, because I can't choose, right? It's just a story that I have to tell that's burning inside of me, and genre doesn't matter. I love elements of all these different genres. I want to put them together, So yeah, I think that the family, and that was one of the most important things to being Latinx and having that connection to family. Mm-hmm. And so Eva grew up without her mom and dad, and her sister is her mom. And so it's really about she didn't feel like she had a model for a mom. And it's learning that how the people in our lives are our family. It doesn't matter what the prescribed role is. Mm-hmm. She had a mother all along. Mm-hmm. And she knows how to mother, and learning to trust herself. And then I feel the love story came out of that. If we have to know ourselves in order to love ourselves, and then we can love others, right? Yeah. And it sounds like a truism, but it's true. That's because it's true.
Absolutely. And since we're you said that your story came to you whole, so how do you approach the writing craft? And that question's for our writer friends who are here, because I'm always interested in finding out how writers write.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I first wrote in the dark completely. Even though I had the idea of the story, I started and I wrote it during NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, in November of 2018. And I wrote 150 pages of it and sent it to a fellow writer. And she's like, this isn't where your story starts.
I got that before.
Right?
A few times.
She's like, your story started a year before this, And so I just put those pages away. I think I might have copied and pasted, 10 or 20 of them, but the rest of it it just got, it was the compost pile really that became the fertilizer for the story. And so I started again a year previously in the story, and then it just all came out. It started to come out. And my husband, who couldn't be here tonight because he's a nurse and he's working the night shift at the hospital, he is my kind of partner in crime and writing crime fiction. And so I tell him all of my ideas and I say, okay, I got this plot hole. Like, I give him like a dozen plot holes and he brainstorms with me. Like, he'll spend hours upon hours. He's a good storyteller. And he'll help me go through fix the plot holes. So it comes out whole, but whole means like, it's like a crocheted blanket, and you fold it up and there's holes everywhere, and he helps me fix those.
Yeah, it's so nice to have a partner. My husband does it too.
Yeah.
He's more like a copy editor.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I was just like, does this suck? And he'll tell me no, and then I was like, you're not. No, I don't believe you. and then he has to keep telling me what doesn't work and what works. So
I wanted to hear more about your process too.
I'm chaos. My process is that I have an idea, like with Reset, the idea came to me out of nowhere in the middle of the night where I was really frustrated and I erased everything. And that was when the idea came where, if I could erase memories of people and start fresh, what would life be like and what would be the reason for it? And the reason for it, I didn't want it to be like a dystopian, like because usually the reason to control people is just just dystopian. But I was set out to kind of like more gray characters and more gray places, and so I started it as a utopia. And then eventually, as I was writing more and more, it became very clear that it wasn't all good. So I rewrote that book probably 3 times, front to back, because I'm chaos and I have to kind of figure things out as I go. And my second book, I wrote like 111,000 pages, and half of that was backstory. So I had to delete half the book and rewrite it. So that it's, a real book. So that's my usual process.
Yeah, I call that the accordion method. I don't do quite as many pages, but to write, I think my first draft of River Woman was over 400 pages. And so I was expanded and then truncate it. So like the accordion, you pull it out and push it back in. And I did that several times.
Yeah. And it really helps you learn to kill the darlings.
Yeah.
And it's such a good thing to do as a writer because you're so attached to your words, right? But to kind of train yourself to not be, to really actually be more attached to the story and not the words.
Yeah. And one really cool exercise that I tried, because I tried submitting it to a screenplay contest for Netflix, had partnered up with, I forget who it was, but so they were doing this call and it was for thrillers and it was for like female powered thrillers. And I was like, okay, River Woman, River Demon would be awesome for that. So I actually wrote a screenplay. I'd never written a screenplay before. So I just sort of taught myself how to cobble together a screenplay. And in doing that, before I did the final rounds of revisions, there were so many elements in the story that became much clearer to me and focused because I had to visualize them for the screen. And how would I tell the story, right, without just relying on being inside of Eva's head? If she can't just tell the audience or the reader, right, if you have to see it. And so like at least 4 or 5 brand new scenes grew from that process of writing it as a screenplay. So that's an exercise now that I suggest people try, even if you don't do a whole screenplay, but at least to envision it as a movie or, envision it for the screen and then see what that would change in your novel.
Great advice.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun too.
It may be time, right, to ask the audience to ask some questions. Do you guys have anything?
Oh, there are lots of challenging parts of writing. I mean, I was writing it during the pandemic. And I have two children. They're both here. My son's sitting in the YA section reading, and my daughter's here in the audience. And they were both doing junior high level schoolwork at the time. And so I was homeschooling them, teaching them, and I had created a complete curriculum. I wasn't going through the school. And then I would teach them from, whenever we woke up, so 7 or 8 in the morning, until after lunch, so like around 1 or 2 every day. And then my daughter and I were writing a middle grade book together. And so we would work on that. And then after that, in the evenings and on the weekends and during breaks, I was writing this book. And so I would say just being a mom and trying to survive and keep my family safe, but all of those fears that were kind of compressed and, at a boiling point, because everything was scary in 2020. And, and so that's when I finished the book in 2020. And so I feel like even though it was so difficult to live through that, those feelings became distilled in the book. And I'm so grateful for that experience, because what Eva does to keep her family safe, I felt like that's what I was doing in my real life too. Yeah. What about you? What was the most difficult?
Writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Writing, period. And well, I think it's trying to grab hold of that little butterfly that just keeps trying, just a little bit out of reach.
Yeah.
And to try to kind of understand, the characters. And I'm actually a writer of place first. And usually a lot of people go from the characters and then they write places around it. I'm a writer of place, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that I grew up in a place that's just so magical. And so I was always kind of seeing a location as a character and how everyone else fit into that environment. I feel like that's what affects them, and that's what drives them. So so my challenge is kind of just writing, just keep on writing to make sure that, I get myself out of the questions and outside of my head, and just trying to kind of put words on paper, because once you have the words on paper, it becomes a lot easier to see.
Exactly. I tell my daughter all the time, let's just get words on the page, because we can do something with something, but nothing with nothing.
Exactly.
And so you just have to have some words on the page to lay the story tracks down. So I think that would be the second hardest thing for me, or maybe the first hardest thing, is to quiet the voices in my head that tell me that I can't do it, or why am I doing it, or it's not going to get very good reviews, or I'm not going to make enough money off of it to make a living, or whatever. To put all that aside and say, that doesn't matter. I have a story to tell.
Exactly. And a lot of times we're so close to the story that we don't really see we don't really see all its flaws. And that's when you have an editor, you have a fellow writer, you have a group of trusted voices that can help you tease all of that out.
Right.
So that's also really important to have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyone else have?
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great question, because I would say that all of my books are like women-centered literary psychological thrillers, but there's not a section for that, And so my first novel was considered speculative fiction or science fiction, but then because there's a category there for magical realism. And then my second one is literary, but then again with the tag of magical realism. And then this one is psychological thriller / supernatural thriller. So it's kind of it's in the horror section here, which I love, because there are horror elements. And probably all of my, well, at least Trinity Sight could go with horror. I mean, so I'm just grateful for wherever it goes in the bookstore. And then how do I brand myself, like on my website, and how do I tell people? Because I think that in the bookstore, people are going to find it, you know, whether they go to science fiction, whether they go to horror, whether they go to literary fiction, my people who I'm speaking to are going to find it because they're all of those people. And then how do I brand it is just, like I said, it's magical realism. I didn't know that I was a horror writer. And so people started telling me because my mom has always told me that my books are scary and my poems are scary. And she was, can't you write me a happy poem? Can't you write me a happy story? Remember that story you wrote one time that was so funny? And I'm like, Mom, that was like 20 years ago. And so people started telling me that I was horror. And so I think that's the other thing, is that we don't always know what genre or what we're writing or who it's going to resonate with. We don't know who our people are. We're just writing the best stories that we can. And then our audiences, our publishers, like, they will tell us. And I just trust that process because I get great feedback when I was at a book conference in Sacramento a couple weeks ago, and someone came up to me that I'd never met and told me that she had read Jubilee and she loved it so much. And, it was published during the pandemic. And this is, I think, the first live conversation I've had since the pandemic. So I don't know how it got to her. I have no idea, but it did. And I think that's part of the magic of the process that we have to trust as well. That's been my experience. What about you, Sarina?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't write to genre because I'm still trying to figure out all of this. I just want to tell the story that I have inside me. And I feel like books are, to me, I don't look at books as products. I look at them as people. I look at them as a space in time, a pair of shoes that belong to someone that I don't know, that I want to kind of inhabit for a while. I look at it as a life, an opportunity to live a completely different life, or maybe not, than what I live day to day. And so to me, I look at books like, it's almost different mood. It's almost like people. So I don't go to people and said, what are you? I meet them, and then I'm open to the experiences that they bring to the table, and I'm open to whatever they're willing to teach me. And I feel like when I kind of go into a book open-minded, I get so much more out of it. And I find that my readers, I'm surprised all the time by the comments that I get from readers. A lot of them would say, I don't usually read sci-fi.
Yes, I get that all the time.
Your book is the first sci-fi, or your book is the first dystopian fiction, or your book is the first love story I've ever read. But it's so different than what I usually read. And that kind of surprise seems to delight them. And I want to continue to be, surprising. My second book, I began it as, it's a prequel to my first book. And it ended up being also a psychological thriller with an unreliable narrator.
Yes.
Because they're just so fun to write. So I go into a book writing or reading like I do with another person. Yeah. And then sometimes they're a stranger at first, and then you find something in them that just really connect with you. Like Jen, we were strangers just 2 weeks ago. I know. And I feel like I know her forever. And that's how I feel with books.
And books connect us like that, right? We read each other's books, and now it's like besties for life.
Absolutely. Don't leave.
I know. I'm
Stay in San Diego.
That's awesome. Yes. Oh, those are such great questions. Oh my gosh. How am I so prolific? So I think it's like Sarina was saying in terms of going into it with a question and going into it with an openness. And so I don't, like, even though I know the story, I don't exactly know what the plot is going to be, but I will go in there with an emotion, I would say. And that is what I stay open to. And so just like, how do I do it? Physically, I turn on music that I was a dancer growing up, and I did a lot of ballet. And my mom would always say, just turn on the music and close your eyes and dance. And so that's what I do, even though, I can't like physically dance. I sort of do anyway. And my daughter, I was watching her write the other day. We're writing our middle grade book together, and she was doing the same thing at the keyboard. And so it's just this idea of letting go. And I think it really is like, once I turn the music on, that's a signal for me to quiet those voices, all of the doubt, all of the everything that would tell me that I can't do this, or I shouldn't do this, or why am I doing this? Other people have done it better than me. And I have all of those questions that would keep me from continuing, but I turn on the music and I dance, and that's how I don't know how I'm so prolific. I just know that I turn on the music and words come out. So I'm thankful for that, and I hope that continues. I have several chronic illnesses, and brain fog has now become a major inhibitor to that process. So what I'm doing with that is that I will tell my story to my husband, because I can, I have conversations with him on a regular basis, so that I feel that kind of uninhibited energy, and I've been recording them, and then I play them, and then that's where the story comes from when I lose words. So I don't know. I just dance at the keyboard. Is there a through line that? Oh, okay. Then you asked, how do I stay so resilient with it? I have so many stories to tell. like right now, I'm bursting to tell 3 stories, and I only have enough time to work on the middle grade book. That is going to be so wonderful. It's our indigenous girl-powered version of a kind of a Percy Jackson journey, and so we're very, very excited. We're almost finished with it and sending it to our agent. So I'm really pushing. Actually, my daughter's really pushing me to hurry up and finish that with her. And then I'm also working on a second novel called Salt Bones, which takes place down in the Imperial Valley at the Salton Sea, right by where we grew up. And I have these 2 stories to tell, but I also have several more that I want to tell. And so it's like just tapping into that energy that we don't know how long we have here. We're not guaranteed any time. But I know I want to go out telling stories, as many as I possibly can. So that's how I stay resilient. And like every no is just, it's like, it pushes me. Like I'm grateful for the no's, even though I cry, even though I text you, I'm like, I'm crying and sad and I'm eating all the ice cream. I know that the yeses are like, okay, they're just pushing me down the road to the yeses, and then they've come. In terms of what is there in each book, I don't know. What is there in each book? Someone tell me. I don't know. It's women powered, women centered, healing, I say. Yeah. Loving the self to love. Like loving maybe, you know what it is? I think I love my daughter so much, and I can tell her every good thing about herself. And then she turns around and she's like, but Mama, so are you. And so I told her, like, I told her something the other day, and she looked at me. She's like, but Mama, you're a phenomenal woman. And so then I looked up the Maya Angelou poem, and we were reading Phenomenal Woman. And I think that's what every book is. Every book is a daughter who, like, I love so much that they can then turn around and reflect that back to me so I can see it. Yeah. What about you, Sarina?
I am not prolific.
I would say you are. You've written 2 books now.
I've actually written more, but I still don't feel like I'm prolific. I feel like I'm such a slow writer because I guess because I compare myself as a writer to people who can finish a book in 3 months. And I'm like, it takes me a year. What's wrong with me?
There's nothing wrong with you, though, by the way. It takes me a year or 2 or 3 to finish a book.
I know, and that's what I have to tell myself, and that's the problem, I think, with with feeling whether or not how much to write a day and all of that. And I think I still struggle with that. The through line in my story, it's love. It's a love story. I want to tell a story to people that won't normally hear this story, and I just feel like the vehicle to it is love at the core of every story that I write. Not necessarily the genre, because I kind of stumbled into sci-fi. When I pitched it, I didn't even call it sci-fi. I called it speculative fiction. I called it a speculative love story. Yeah, anything that I write is just kind of that is at the center. So
I love your book so much. I won't give away the ending, but there's this just beautiful synchronicity to the beginning and the end. And I was crying, and I gave it to my husband right away. I was like, you have to read this. It was one of those books I wished we were reading together. So usually we'll read a book aloud together, but I had already started it without him. So now he's digging into it.
Yeah, and making everyone read your book too. I love it. Any other questions?
Like how many other drafts of other things? Yeah, no, I'm of the mindset that like anything can be revised. Anything can be, you can make anything work. That's my opinion. I mean, I know that, so if people put things away, I respect that. But my own process is this story came to me for a reason, and I will revise it every single year if possible until it's ready to go out. And that's actually what happened with my second novel. It's the first one I wrote during NaNoWriMo. I had just had my daughter. She was a year old, and it was like, you're 12. So it was like 11 years ago. And it took me until she was 11. So it took me a decade to get it published.
Oh, wow.
And I was revising it every single year, like full on revisions every single year. But I knew that story had to go out into the world. Like I could not rest until that story was out in the world. And it was actually, I had written my second novel and then sent that one out. That's the one that got picked up, and my agent slipped JUBILEE in there with it. And my publisher, Blackstone, gave me a 3-book deal, and I hadn't even written the 3rd book yet. And so JUBILEE just kind of rode the skirt of TRINITY SIGHT, but I wouldn't give up on it. I just wouldn't. So how many stories have I written? 3. How many books have I published? 3. It's because I believed in them. And I think like a lot of people need to hear that, because I kept hearing, put your first draft away. Your first draft was just for you to learn. And I'm like, okay, great. Did you learn something? Great. Do you still want to publish it? Get it back out, because now you've learned something, right? Go back to it. If you still feel that love for it, maybe you don't, and that's fine. But if you love it, right, that's the first step, because I think other people are going to love it too. And that's how, like you said, they're people. That's how we connect with each other. So that's like, it's a life that you love, and it's valuable. So if you have manuscripts in the drawer that you've been discouraged about, like take it back out, take a look at it, give it to a different reader and try again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes I think like, you may not see a story in it, but someone else might, or someone else might see the problem that you were kind of too close to. You didn't see it.
Like I had no idea that River Woman was supposed to start a year earlier until someone else saw that.
Yeah, I had that same problem with my second book when I was writing
Yeah.
it. I started too late. That was my problem. And so everyone was just depressed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And my.
How did they get that way? Right. So that was the story. Going back.
Exactly. And my critique partner, who she's probably on there watching, hello. She told me it's not right. And then I came to, the reason myself. And so sometimes a story is not quite there, and someone else will come and tell you. With my second book also, my editor was the one who told me with a month, to edit, that it wasn't ready. And I was grateful that someone saw that it wasn't ready and told me how to fix it.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of went and fixed it in 18 days. So that's, so every book is different, every story is different. So it's almost like you just kind of have to keep at it, and don't stop.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That was such a great question. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Awesome.
Yay. That's exciting.
May 2023.